Okay, hello, dear students. After we have read the story Laugh and we explained all the important details in our story, we have to learn now, or we will analyze our story to the important skills. Okay, and the first skill in our story is the story structure. What do I mean by the story structure? It means the story's elements. Okay. And what do I mean by the story's elements? It means the important parts in the story that made up the story shape or the whole story. What are the story's elements that make the story structure? We have the setting, which is the place and time. We have the characters, and we have main and minor characters. We have the conflict, which is the problem. The plot events, the main events after the problem and before the last element, which is the resolution, which is the end of the problem. Okay, now what is the setting? As we said, it's the place and time. What's the place that the story took place in? It's in USA, in America. Okay, what is the time? They didn't mention specific time, but we can say during many days. Okay, in our story. Now, who are the characters? We have main characters. Of course, we have Peter and Angela, and the minor characters like the kids in the neighborhood, the students, and the principal. Now, the conflict, which is the problem that the main characters are facing. Okay, we have here actually two problems. The first problem that Peter was facing, which is the time machine doesn't go forward for a long time, and he was working on this problem. And the second problem that Angela was facing, which is Angela wants to win the writing contest. So these are two important problems in our story. Usually any story has one problem, but here we have two problems. Okay. Now, the plot events, which are the important events happened after the problem that the main characters did and acted to try to solve their problems. What are the important events happened after the problem? The first one, Peter fixed his time machine to go forward for 7 minutes, and he was working on this on his machine. And the second one, Angela used the time machine to go forward to read the winning story in the school's magazine. Okay, in the school's magazine. Okay, now so these are important events that the main characters did. Now these events led to the end of the problem and to the end of the story, which is the resolution that Angela won the writing contest, and she is the writer of our story, actually, Laugh. Okay, so these are the important story elements and the important details in our story that help us to know the story structure, which means how these parts help us to know the shape or how they made up the shape of the story. So these are one of the important skills we need to learn in our story. And also now we have other important skills, which is who is the narrator of our story, which is the point of view. Now, what do I mean by point of view? It means who is narrating the story, who is telling the story, okay? I'm not talking about who's writing the story, because sometimes the writer is someone and the narrator is another person. Here we are talking about the narrator, who is telling the story. And we have two kinds of point of view. We have first point of view and third point of view. Okay, first point of view means that the narrator who is telling the story is a character in the story, and he is telling the story about himself or herself, and he or she uses the pronouns I, me, and my. Third point of view means that the narrator who is telling the story is not a character in the story, and he is telling a story about others. Okay, so who is the narrator of our story? The narrator of our story is Angela. and Angela is a character in the story. So this means that our story has first point of view, because the narrator again is Angela, and Angela is a character in our story, and she is telling a story about herself and about Peter and everything related to them. So our story has first point of view again, because the narrator, who's Angela, is a character in the story, and she uses the pronouns I, me, and my. Okay, and the last skill in our story is figurative language, and the figurative language are many. We use them to describe emotions, to describe feelings, to describe actions, to describe the personality of the character. And here in our story we have only two figurative language, which is simile and idiom. You know, simile, it's a figurative language. We use it to compare between two different things using as or like. And the similes in our story are Peter's hair as black as licorice, when the writer compares Peter's hair with licorice because it's black, using as. A booth that looked like a shower stall, a booth which is the time machine. The writer compared it with a shower style, using like. And I sat like a stone, when the writer compared Angela, because this pronoun I refers to Angela, with a stone when she was surprised when she heard her name as a winner in the writing contest, using here like. So these are the similes of in our story. The writer used them to describe, for example, here to describe how Peter's look, here to describe how the booth looks, for example, and here to describe Angela's emotions and her reaction when she heard her name in the winning as a winner in the writing contest. Okay. Now, the other figurative language, which is the idiom, and the idiom, you know, when we use words that have their own literal meaning, but we use them to describe different meaning. Also, we use them to describe, let's say, actions, emotions, personalities, and so on. The first idiom, which is his head buried in books. Here, the writer described Peter that he's a nerd and he's reading a lot because his head is always buried in books. You can't bury your head in a book, but which means that he's always holding books to read and study. And this is an idiom to describe Peter's personality. And the other one, a brilliant idea hit me, when Angela got an idea in her mind about the writing contest. And can the idea hit someone? Of course not, but which means that an idea popped in your mind or in someone's mind. So we use this idiom, we can describe this action, let's say. So these are the skills, the important skills in our story. As we said, the point of view, which is first point of view, the figurative language, simile and idiom, and of course the main skills, which is the story's structure, or the story's elements in our story LAFFF. Thank you so much, everyone.